So in this video, we're finally going to be deriving Fermi's golden rule. And we're going to be interpreting it on a macroscopic level. So we're going now from our two-level system, so with some energy E2 and E1, and some wave functions, some total wave function as a function of space and time. We're trying to go from this now to macroscopic quantities. So to physically meaningful things other than the wave function that we care about. And we've solved this system. So we said we had a solution for C2, this coefficient. So if this wave function, this total wave function of this electron is just a linear combination of this wave function for this energy level, E1, and this wave function for this energy level, E2, then C1 and C2 are just the proportionality constants. So psi1 xt plus C2 psi2 xt. Then we figured out a solution for C2 as a function of time. We said that it was just equal to A, which I'm going to rewrite now as the physical quantities that it represents. So Q E naught over H bar times our matrix element, which we said some physicists have just figured out for us. So we don't need to know what this is. It's just a number. And then multiplied by this complex exponential. So this function of time, e to the I delta omega minus omega L t over 2 times t times sinc of delta omega minus omega L over 2 times t. And actually there should be a 1 over 2i out front, which I seem to have missed. But how do we convert this into something meaningful? So we have this coefficient as a function of time, but we'd like to interpret this as some macroscopic quantity. So let's say that our two-level system corresponds to a semiconductor. So say pick your favorite semiconductor. We've got silicon, for example, and then you're applying light at a certain frequency with a certain electric field. Let's say you've got a bunch of electrons in this or in the silicon block of silicon. Let's say you've got 10. You've got 10 whole electrons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And let's say somehow they're all able to occupy this energy level E1, or they're at least able to occupy energy levels very close to E1. So we've got a bunch of electrons close to E1. And we have the coefficient C2 as a function of time. So we know, since the probability of an electron being in state 2 is just the magnitude of C2 squared, we know that initially, since C2 is equal to 0, there's 0 electrons in this top state. But if we wait for some time, let's say we wait for, I don't know, 10 picoseconds, then maybe C2 at 10 picoseconds, or magnitude C2 squared, maybe it's 0.1. And we interpret this as one electron transitioning from the bottom state E1 to the top state E2. So on average, there's going to be one electron now in the top state E2 and 9 electrons in the bottom state. Or we have had one electron has been absorbed. Or in other words, 10% of our total electrons. So 10% of our total electrons have been absorbed. And this corresponds to magnitude C2 squared equals 1. So if we're interested in the percentage of total electrons transitioning or getting absorbed, so getting absorbed per unit time, all we need to do per unit time, all we need to do is differentiate this quantity. So differentiate magnitude C2 squared with respect to time, and this will give us our transition rate. Or also, we can divide by the volume to get our recombination rate or our generation rate. If in this case, since we're generating electrons in the conduction band, for example. We're absorbing a certain number of those photons. And so let's do that. Let's take the magnitude squared of this function, and then let's see what happens from there. Well, if we're going to take the magnitude, then this guy's going to disappear because its magnitude is always 1. This t is going to become t squared. The sinc is going to become sinc squared because we're taking the magnitude squared, delta omega minus omega L over 2 times t. This is not meaningful. Delta omega minus omega L times 2t. And now this whole coefficient out front, this just gets magnitude squared. So q e naught over h bar, or let's say over 2 h bar, psi 1 x psi 2. This all gets magnitude squared. And actually, these aren't functions of time. What am I doing? These should be written in white. So q e naught over 2 h bar, psi 1 x psi 2. We're interested in the magnitude of this whole quantity squared. And now we want to take the derivative with respect to time of this expression. But it's kind of ugly. Like, it's not pretty. But I'm going to play another trick. Let's plot this sinc squared quantity. So let's plot this sinc squared function as a function of delta omega minus omega L. So we're plotting it as a function of the frequency difference between this delta omega between our two energy levels and the actual frequency of light that's applied. Well, if we plot the sinc squared function, we need to evaluate it at a certain time. So maybe let's say the time is a picosecond. Sinc squared might look something like this. So it's going to have these lobes off to the side. It's going to be sort of periodic. But this is going to be the sinc squared function evaluated at a certain time. So say t is equal to 1 picosecond, for example. But if we start to wait for an increasing amount of time, so say 10 picoseconds, this sinc function starts to get really, really sharp. So instead of this initial sort of flat and round sinc function, we start to get something that's increasingly peaked. And at maybe t is equal to 100 picoseconds. So if we're willing to wait long enough, this system starts to look like some just absurd spike. And we know what an absurd spike is. That is just a delta function. So if we wait long enough, this sinc squared starts to look like a delta function. And rigorously, it starts to look like 2 pi over t. 2 pi over t times a delta function. That's so that the units work out and everyone's happy. That's what this sinc squared delta omega minus omega L over 2t starts to look like as you let t become larger and larger. And yeah, it's sort of a hack. Like it's sort of just a mathematical trick that we're playing. But it's a pretty good one, and it turns out to give us pretty excellent results. So we're going to use it. We're going to use this hack. And so if we plug in this sinc squared function into our original equation, I'm just going to lump all this now into some other coefficient. Let's call this b, magnitude of b squared, just because I'm lazy like that. Then our whole equation just becomes magnitude of b squared times t squared times 2 pi over t times delta. Oh, and actually, I should be writing these in white because they're not functions of time. That was the beauty of this simplification. So 2 pi over t, this delta function, there's no longer an ugly function of time in it. It's just sort of sitting there. And so these t's cancel, and we've got magnitude of c2 t squared is just equal to this. And so let me just erase the 2 t's now. So we've got a 2 pi sitting out front. But other than that, things are great. And so this is absolutely gorgeous. If we want to take the derivative with respect to this, all we do is get rid of the t. And we have our final result. And this is Fermi's golden rule. So this is Fermi's golden rule. That the time derivative or essentially the transition rate of our electrons, is just equal to this b squared coefficient, which let's rewrite it. QE naught over 2h bar times our matrix element psi1 x psi 2, all this magnitude squared times now just 2 pi this delta function, delta omega minus omega L. And this is really interesting because this says the transition rate, so the transition rate, so not this, not the C2 coefficient, but the number of electrons that are making a transition per unit time is constant. And that's really interesting because that sort of tells us what we already knew. We know from kind of everyday experience that if we shine light on anything, be it a semiconductor or whatever, it's going to absorb a certain number of photons. So it's going to absorb a certain number of photons per unit time. But if we continuously shine this light, shine light on this device, this semiconductor or whatever we have, it's going to start to heat up probably. So the temperature is going to go up because we're shining light on it, and those carriers, their energy has to go somewhere. But we don't expect the absorption. So let's say the absorption coefficient to fluctuate wildly as a function of time. We kind of just expect we turn on the light and some amount of photons get absorbed per unit time. And this is exactly what Fermi's golden rule is telling us. So we just expect the absorption to look like this as a function of time. We expect it to be flat. This also tells us something we kind of already knew. This has the magnitude of the electric field squared inside it, which means that the number of photons absorbed is proportional to, oh god, I was going to use alpha. Let's say is proportional to magnitude of E naught squared, which is just the intensity of the light. So the intensity just E naught squared divided by 2 times the wave impedance, but is proportional to the intensity, which we already knew. So we've actually recovered a lot of common sense in generating Fermi's golden rule. The only weird thing about it is how do we deal with this delta function, and also how do we actually plug in numbers to this thing, because the delta function is sort of a spike. It's kind of hard to interpret. And the answer is going to be that this is going to be only meaningful inside an integral. But that's good because we said from the beginning that we wanted to carry out an integral, or we wanted to carry out a sum over many possible states. So instead of just E2 and E1, we wanted to integrate over our entire conduction band and our entire valence band. And so this delta function lends itself very naturally to integration. And we're ultimately going to replace this delta function with the density of states as a function of omega, or the density of states eventually as a function of energy. And so that's just a preview of what's going to happen in the future. And so now we're ready to start figuring out, oh, there's the edge of the world. Now we're ready to start figuring out what the absorption coefficient is of a given semiconductor. So silicon, germanium, gallium arsenide. Now that we have Fermi's golden rule, we're ready to start figuring out what the absorption coefficient is. And we're also almost ready to start talking about phenomena like stimulated emission and spontaneous emission, which are almost, you would go through exactly the same procedure as we did here with Fermi's golden rule. It's just you'd have different starting conditions. So instead of C1 is equal to 1, we'd have C2 is equal to 1 if we're interested in stimulated emission. And you'd get an identical result. And so this is where stimulated emission comes from. Spontaneous emission is a little more subtle, but we'll go over it in the future. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, post them down below and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. And thanks for watching.